Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Today we'll have a look at how we can build this simple component which allows us to associate a model with another model. We are going to be using the polymorphic many-to-many relationship, which means what we'll be able to do is to have things like, for instance, posts and videos, both of them being able to connect with the tags. To do this, we would have this tagables intermediate table where we specify what tag ID is going to be associated with which of the types, for instance, video and post, and then what ID of the record for one of those given models. Now, in our case, we're going to be using products and categories, but that's just the general idea of obviously polymorphic many-to-many relationships. First thing we need to do is actually, before we go to GitHub, let's just have a look at actually what this component is going to do. So as you can see, we have this product title, then we have an option whether it has categories or not. If I check the table in the database, you'll see that what I've created here, we have categories, which represents several different categories, and then we have a product. And then if I want to have categories under the product, we're going to use this category labels table. At the moment, there are no associations. If we go back and I select yes, and don't select anything, obviously nothing changes. This table is still empty, but if I start clicking on different categories, you'll see mountain bikes, electric bikes. Now if I go to the table, refresh, you can see this has connected product model with the ID 1, which is obviously the product that we have in a table, with categories 4 and 1, category for electric bikes and 1 mountain bikes. And if I now refresh the page, obviously this selection stays. If I select no, what this will do is deselect all of those categories, removing them from a database, and obviously, sorry, from the database, but from a table category labels, because this is our joint table. And if we refresh the page, you'll see these are now not being selected. And obviously we are back to now being selected for this particular product. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna need to do is to either fork this repository or download it. I'm going to clone it simply. You can do the same thing. So just copy this using the terminal. Obviously the repository is on the github.com /ssd-tutorials /vue-Laravel-conditional-association. So let's go to our terminal. I'm in the correct directory, so I'm just going to do git clone, and let's clone this project. A few seconds and that should be in. And now if I just go to this directory, see the vue Laravel conditional association. So the first thing we're gonna have to do is install Composite dependencies. So composer install. And while this is installing, I'm going to open this project in my IDE. I'm going to be using PHP Storm. So code, there we go, and we have association. Just drag it across here. So these are our exercise files, basically the Laravel project. And we have factory, could not scan for classes inside factories. Okay, because we don't have any at the moment, so that's fine. So if we go to databases, database, because we don't have any factories, obviously we're not gonna see this directory. Let me just check actually if I've created any. Yes, we're gonna have one. So don't worry, we're gonna create this during the course of this screencast. Okay, so the first thing, the next thing after that, what we want to do, because I didn't push the repository that compiled CSS and JavaScript files. If we go to the resources, you'll see we have app.js, which uses already one simple component, which is representing these checkboxes. I'm using SVG for these checkboxes, so they are not standard inputs from a system inputs. They are SVGs. So what I did, if you check this component, you'll see we just have an SVG with a path. One is for the checked, the other one is for the unchecked. So we have if checked, property set to true, display this path, which is basically the checked vector, and then otherwise display the unchecked one. So we have this very simple component, which is already, as you can see, registered. Later on, we're going to remove it from this app.js as it's going to actually sit inside of another component. But let's leave this for now the way it is. First of all, we're going to do is create the tests and do the backend work. If we open, we are using Tailwind here for this, for the layout and for any other styling. If we open Webpack mix, I've also set everything up here, so you can see that's all done. So we have app.js and we have app.scss. So if you want to add any other styling, you can obviously use this app.scss. If you're familiar with Sass, I'm only using standard Tailwind components and utilities, so nothing extra here. Okay, so now that we have installed our Composite dependencies, let's now set the key. If we open our first of all, we need to actually copy the env file. So copy env.example, and we want to create the env file. So now that it's been copied, if you check, you'll see we have this file created. We need to generate the key. So PHP artisan key generate. Oops, require conditional autolog. Artisan. No such directory. Let's just quickly check again what's happening here. Vendor compose hold on, where is this autoloader? No autoloader. Composer update required. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be the autoload, so I'm not quite sure why it hasn't been generated. Maybe we need to create this factories directory first. We go to database. Factories. Let's try again. Let's just do composer dump autoload optimized. Okay, I think we should be okay now. Is the autoload? Yeah, that's been generated. Sounds better. So yeah, if you're struggling with this, just create an empty factories directory. I think this is something to do with the composer factories. Yeah, because we have this one mapped as a class here. We have seeds directory, but we didn't have this factories. That's why this was causing the problem. Okay, so now let's go back to our key generation. That's it. So now this key has been generated. So that's good. And the last thing we need to do is to run npm run, and let's do watch, because actually before we watch, let's just do def for now, just so it generates them. First of all, we need to install the npm dependencies. This is npm install, and then we're gonna run just npm def to make sure that it generates the assets for us, and it will save our CSS and JavaScript files into the assets under the public. So it's going to create the assets directory, and then JS directory for JavaScript files, and CSS directory for all the CSS files. Okay, so the next thing, how's this going? Is it still installing? In the meantime, while this is installing, let's have a look at the roots. We have web. For the time being, we only have a single component, simple controller, which is this product controller with the index methods. And that index method, this action simply returns the view, which you can find under resources, views. You have product and you have index, and this is basically our view. So here I just put the burst structure of this form. in the moment, we're obviously going to be converting this to make sure that it works dynamically and makes calls to the server and so on. And obviously, we're going to create those Vue.js components as well. But for the time being, this product controller, that's all it's going to do. We're just going to pass actually one of the products. Once we have product model, we're going to pass it to the view so we can actually use the values like name of the product and display dynamically within the view as well. But that's going to happen a little bit later. Let's just quickly have a look at this npm situation here. Okay, so that's all installed. Now we're going to run npm run dev, just quickly compile the assets. And if we go back here, in a moment we should see assets directory together with the JS and CSS files. That takes just a few more minutes, hopefully. Seconds, I would rather prefer. There we go. So that's all done. So we now have assets, CSS, and JavaScript files. They are not minified because we selected npm run dev. For production, obviously, you would use the npm run production, and all these scripts are available here, so you can see in the package.json which scripts you have available. Okay, so now what we can do is finally open this project in a browser, and I'm using Valid on Mac, so it's super easy. If you are using XAMPP or any other server side setup on your machine, make sure you set it up obviously with virtual host and so on, so you can obviously access it via browser. So I'm going to use view constructor destructor, and it tells me it cannot be found. Let's just quickly have a look at what we have here. View Laravel condition assignment. This is the wrong one. Okay. View Laravel conditional association. In Chrome, I have to precede it with the protocol as well. And there we go. So this is what we have. It's just a template. Obviously, nothing works at the moment. We just have a layout. So the first thing I'm going to do is to start with the test. And if we go to the terminal, I'm going to start with creating a test for product category. So PHP artisan make test product category test. If we go to the editor, we should now see it under test features, and there we go. Okay, what we're going to need, I'm going to remove what's been generated here by default, and we are going to use refresh database trait because we're going to be interacting with the database, and before each test we want the database to be cleared completely. And if we have a look at our phpunit.xml, you'll see that for the database connection we are using SQLite, and database type is going to be in memory, so we're not saving anything into the file system, making our test run much smoother. Okay, first of all, I'm going to create a private property called product, and this product will represent the instance of the product model. So because I want to use this model rather than writing it and then obviously finding out that this model doesn't exist, let's quickly create this model. So it's going to use PHP artisan make model, and it's going to be called product, and I want to create the migration for it as well. So migration hyphen migration, hit return. Oops, and what have we got here? Create table, fail to open string direct. Okay, so again, we don't have the directory for it. So database migrations we need to create because the script doesn't create it on its own. So migration, there we go. And if I try now again, hopefully with a bit of luck, model already exists. Okay, let's remove it and run the same command again. There we go. So model and the migration has been created. Now, why we having problems with these missing directories? It is because with Git, empty directories aren't being pushed to the repository. Unless there are any files within the directories on its own, empty ones won't be pushed to the repository. That's why obviously they weren't included here. But now we have this, this migration for the product, and we have this product model. So obviously next time when you're going to be pushing this saved project to the repository, you will obviously have this migration, and then when we add the factory, that also will go to the repository. Okay, this one is going to be of the product type, and I'm using PHP 7.4. When I actually can specify what property represents. So I'm going to go for PHP just in my editor to make sure that it doesn't highlight it. I want to make sure that we are using 7.4, and I only have 7.3 parser installed, but that should get rid of these highlights. Now let's import this model here. So there we go. So that's our product. Now if we go for the setup method, we're going to start with protected function setup, and this setup method returns void. And what we're going to do first, we're going to call parent setup to make sure that everything that needs to be run before each test is running based on this test case. And then we are going to create this new product. So this product equals product, and we're going to use create method. And our product will have a field called name, and for the name of this product we're going to use whatever you want to use. I'm going to use Trek Remedy 9.9 27.5 inch wheels. Okay, so that's our product for the setup. Now next thing we're going to do is we'll create our first test, and obviously we create the test and then we're going to start writing the implementation. So I've got the shortcut here, not this one, test, and this test will fetch all the categories indicating association with the product. So fetches all categories indicating association with product. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create some categories. So categories equals, and we're going to use factory, which we don't have yet. We create some of the records for the category model, so category class, and we want 7 of these records. Now we don't have category model either, so let's quickly create it. We are going to now run PHP artisan make model category again with the migration. So that should now be created, and we have migration for the category as well. So I can now import this category model into this class as well. So now we have categories, and then what I want to do is run this product categories, which will be the method representing the relationship between the product and categories. And I want to attach several categories, from this collection which we've generated here. So I'm going to use categories, and I take the first one, so index 0, ID of it, and then categories. We're going to go for the second one as well with the and its ID. So I'm going to attach both of these to the product. Now these are now related to this product, associated with it. Now we're gonna go for this assert count. We have 2 models, 2 records when we run this product, and we go for categories. We're using this as property, so that means that we're obviously going to have a collection of records associated with it. And then we're gonna go for this assert true, running this product has categories. We're going to have accessor method, which will be represented by this property, and will tell us, return boolean true or false, whether we have any categories associated. And then what we're going to do is create the response variable, because we're going to make a call, this post JSON. We're going to use JSON calls here, and we're going to run the call to the root product category fetch, and we're going to declare which product we want the records for. So product ID. And then whether it needs categories. Basically, when we're going to select this item from this select menu, we go into this select menu will basically indicate whether we want categories or not, the list of categories. So needs categories equals 1. In this case, we will want categories. Okay, so we then assume, make some assertions here. So on this response, so response assert status, and we're gonna use a response illuminate HTTP response, and it's going to be HTTP OK 200 in other words. Let's just rearrange this slightly. And the next thing we're going to do is to check basically what we are receiving. So expectation variable, and here I'm going to use these categories. We are going to sort them by name, and then we're going to map through them, and we're going to go for function category in with each iteration, and we're going to use categories. And here I'm going to return array, and with this array we're going to have value, which will represent category ID, name, which will represent category name, and then we're going to have is attached, and we're going to check in array category ID, category ID within the array categories 0 ID and categories 1 ID. I'll explain in just a second what all that means. And then we want to reset the index, so we're going to just call values. Okay, so as you can see here, what we did, we associated category with the first and second category based on the array index 0 and 1 out of the generated ones with the product. So what we want to make sure that this attached flag represents it's going to return boolean true or false based on whether the given category are currently looping through, because these categories obviously will return all of the available categories, whether the current the category we're currently looping through is within this array, basically the ones that we associated with the product. If it is, then obviously it will indicate that this given category is attached to this product. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is use the response again, and we're gonna say assert exact JSON, and we are expecting that this expectation to array, because we want this to be returned as an array, for this assertion, that it matches what we've now generated here. So the response should match what we've generated within this section here. Okay, the next thing we are just going to do is this assert true, and we're gonna go for this product, and we want the fresh instance of it, so we're going to fetch it again from a database and check again has categories categories. Okay, so that this time is also going to be true. So we have is true here and is true here, so it doesn't change anything. Basically, we had categories associated and we still have them because this needs categories is set to 1. Otherwise, if this was set to 0, then that would remove the categories from a database and that would evaluate to false. But that's going to be the next test. Let's first run this one and see what errors we're gonna get. So by running this test, I'm running this test within my IDE, but obviously you can run it if you just go back here, just run php unit from within the terminal once you are within the project directory. And we can see obviously the first one is telling us that there is a mass assignment exception, add name to fillable properties. Okay, and this is corresponding to the fillable. If we go to has attributes, we have this, is it here as attributes? No, it's going to be guards attributes, fillable. We need to specify that we allow mass assignment of the properties. So fillable, we want to make sure the name we can associate on the go when we are using create or update methods on the model. Okay, so that's the first error. Let's just run it again. Back to terminal, PHP unit. Then we have table product has no column named name. So if we go back, let's use our products migration. And products, the only thing we need to add table, and we're gonna go for string type of the field is going to be a name. Okay, now if we save it, and actually I can do it straight away for the categories because we're keeping it simple here. Obviously all tables would have many more fields, but for these two tables we're only gonna have this. So if we run it again, what error do we get here now? Unable to locate factory with name default category, obviously because we don't have any factories yet. I'm going to close this. So going back to our terminal, let me just open factories is empty. Okay, so we're gonna create the factory PHP artisan make factory category factory. So that should generate our factory here. So factory category, what we're going to use for the model, we're going to change it to category. Let's just import that. Remove this model, and here all we need to do is again return name, and I'm going to use faker, but I'm going to make sure that the first letter of the category is going to be capital, so you see first, and we're using faker. Let's use unique because we want each word to be unique, and then we're going to go for word, for a single word. Okay, so that should generate the category with some random name. So if we go back and let's run the test again, PHP units, what do we get now? We don't have method called categories on the product. So if we go to the product model, and now let me just have a look at here, product categories. Okay, so we're gonna go for public function categories, and this categories method will return morph to many, which is the way of creating many-to-many relationship polymorphically. So category relationship, and obviously you can read more about this on Laravel's website on the many-to-many polymorphic relationship. If you scroll down, eloquate ORM, and then we have relationships. Obviously you can find all this information here. So you have morph to many, and then from our category we're going to be using morphed by many. So let's go back, and here what we're going to do is return this morph to many, and we're using category class. So this is the class we want to use, and what key are we going to be using? Category able. Category able is going to be the one we're going to use for this particular scenario. So now that we have this, actually let's run the test, but obviously we're still going to have an issue here. We don't have this category ables table, so let's now create this join this pivot table, which will be created by running another artisan command, PHP artisan make. It's going to be make migration, and it's going to be called create category ables table, and it's a create statement, so hyphen create, and that's creating our migration. If we go back, open it, well, it didn't add the create schema. So let's just use it schema, and then we go for create, and the table is going to be called, and I'm just going to quickly copy from here, category ables, and then we have function, which will take blueprint, which we have all important here, blueprint, which will be represented by table. And here we use table. It's going to be unsigned big integer representing category ID. Then we're going to have field also unsigned big integer, and that's going to be category able ID. Then we are going to have a table and its string because it's going to represent the class, the model class. So it's going to be category able type. And then I'm going to add the foreign key as well. Table, foreign, and it's going to be category ID. And it's references ID on categories, table, and on delete, I want to cascade. What that means is when we have relationships here and the given category is being removed, then also remove these records, just a cleanup basically if the class is being removed. If the record is being removed. Okay, and it's void. Let's add a void to this down as well, which is happening when we are reversing the. And I'm just going to, actually no, this is drop if exists. So schema drop if exists, and the table name is category ables, like this. Okay, let's just run our test now. And what do we get? Failed asserting that null is true, and that's 38 line. So if we go back to our test, we can now close this migration here. Let's run this again here so I can actually click on it. It takes me to the line. So asserting that is true has, okay, because we obviously don't have this has categories accessor yet. So let's quickly add it to our product. Let's close this terminal. Public function get has categories attribute, and it's going to return boolean. Let's add some dog blocks. Get has categories attribute, and here what I'm going to do is simply return exclamation mark this categories, and it's going to be a property is empty. It's property because when we have relationships, the methods that represent relationship, we can call them as well as properties, which is basically what they will return when we are actually trying to access this relationship. Let's add some dog blocks so our ID doesn't highlight these properties. So we're going to have property of the integer ID. We're going to have property string name. We're going to have property, and that's going to be carbon, support carbon created at, because we are using timestamps here, and updated at. These are default ones. If we open our product, you can see we add in the timestamps, and these are default Laravel ones. Okay, so categories, now we want this to be as a property as well available. So property, and this one will represent collection, and it's going to be categories. Categories, there we go. So now we should, this should pass this true, asserting that it's true. If we run this test again, and it's all good. Now it's telling us that we don't have this root product category fetch. So let's go back to our roots and web. We're going to create a new root, and this one will be using post type of the request, and we're gonna, for the path, we're going to use category, and we are going to use product ID, and then fetch, and this one will call product category controller and fetch method, and we give it a name of what we just used there. So now we obviously need to create this controller. We could call the test again, but obviously it's going to fail and tell us that this controller doesn't exist. So let's just do it straight away. So PHP artisan make controller, and it's going to be called product category controller. And on the HTTP controllers, we now have this product category controller. Excuse me. So what we can do now is obviously create this fetch method. Let's run public function fetch, and it will return some JSON. So new JSON response, for now just this, JSON response and fetch records. Okay, we don't need this import. Let's just see what happens next. If we run PHP unit, so now it tells us that what we actually want, what we want to receive, and what we actually getting is an empty array in the response, which is fine, but because obviously we don't not returning anything here yet. So going back here, the first thing we will want to do is to create the request, because I tend to use requests for all the requests to the controllers to provide the validation, that sort of things. So what I'm going to do is run php artisan make request, and this request is going to be called fetch request. And now we can probably group it under another directory. Let's call it category, so it's all nicely separated if you're working on a bigger project. So we have requests, category, and fetch requests. Let's just add it, inject it here to this fetch method. So fetch request, it will be automatically resolved through the container. We don't need to worry about authorization, so we can remove this method. The rules will be very simple. We just need needs categories flag, which is required and needs to be in either 0 or 1 collection. So it can only be one of those two. So if we go back and run this again, that obviously we're going to get the same result as we did before, because we're still not returning any records, which is cool. So the next thing we're going to do from within this fetch request is going to be the method called public function response data, and this response data is basically going to return the collection of records that we want to return back to the client. So get response data. And now from within our controller, what I'm going to do, if we just go back to category controller, what I'm going to do is straight away return it. So request response data, and that's all we need to do for this particular method within this controller. Okay, so back to our response data. Let me just have a look at this here. Okay, so what we're gonna do first is get the instance of the product. So product equals, and now we, excuse me, we have this argument here. We have the flag for the product, where the product ID will go, but we didn't actually, we're not resolving it anyway. So let's just go to the providers, open the root service provider, and inside of the root service provider, what we're going to do is under the boot method, after this parent boot, what I'm going to do is call root, and I'm going to do patterns first. And I want to make sure that product ID is represented by a numerical value. So 0, 9 in a bracket, square brackets, and plus symbol. Then we're going to use root and model. We want to make sure that every time we have a parameter called product ID, we use this, the value which is replacing this parameter with the record representing the model product. And that's it. So now we go back to our request. Now what we can do from our fetch request response data method, what we can do is use this root, and we need to provide a parameter which we want to resolve. So product ID, and this should give us an instance of the product with this ID, whichever ID we're going to provide. So now that we have a product, we're going to check if exclamation mark this needs categories, and needs categories obviously is going to come with the request. So let's, because again, as you can see, ID is highlighting this, let's add some doc blocks for this class. Property is going to be integer needs categories, There we go. And now it's looking a little bit better. So if it doesn't need categories, in other words, if the value is going to be set to 0, then what we want to do is product, categories, and we want to detach them all. So remove all the association with categories. And then we're going to return new collection, which is going to be just an empty collection. So we're not going to return any data. And otherwise, what we're going to do is return category. We're going to order them by name, and then we're going to get them all. And lastly, we're going to map it to make sure that they are returned in a specific format. So category with each iteration, and we're going to use product with this method as well. So yeah, we return array, and within this array, what I want to do is, again, we want to have value, because it's going to go to fetch this list of checkboxes. So value is going to be category ID. The name is going to be category name, and again we're going to have this is attached. We're going to go for product, use categories. Now we have this collection of categories associated with the product available as a property, and we check if it contains, because on the collection we have this method contains, by ID, whether it contains given category that we are currently iterating over, so we need to use its ID as well. And if it has this category associated, obviously this attach is going to be returning true. Now, as you can see here, we again have this highlighting in the ID. So if I go to category, I'm going to add properties here. Sorry, the dog blocks as well. I'm going to go for property integer ID. We're going to have property string name, and we again property carbon support created add and updated it. And while we here, let's just go to products. We're also going to have fillable names, so we can associate it using create and update. And now I believe that we should finally get a little bit closer to passing this test. And there we go. This test is now passing. So 1 test, 5 assertions, all of which are passing. Okay, so now that we can obtain the record, so we can obtain all of the categories plus have them marked as attached based on for which product we are actually fetching them. The next thing to do will be, I'm just going to close everything here. Next thing we're gonna need will be the option to toggle them, so we can click it and associate it with the given product. Because what the functionality which we have currently in place is when we select no, what's going to happen? The call to the server to this endpoint is going to be made. And if I just go back to our controller and fetch, if it's going to be 0, then it's going to detach all of the categories that were currently associated with the product and return an empty collection, because obviously once we select no, this will be hidden completely. And then if we select yes, that will send the needs categories as 1. At this point, we're going to fetch all of the available categories, indicating which one is attached currently with the product. Obviously, when we going to do this, none of them will be unless we are loading the page, obviously after we've associated the categories with the product. Okay, so that's this. Let's just close this one. We can, I think category, do we have anything else for the category? Let me just quickly check. No category, that's all. We don't need anything else here. We need our product category controller. Root service provider, we don't need anything else from that one. We will play with our web.php, the roots. Okay, we're gonna start with the next. Let's just go straight away for the next test. So the next text will be called, in the next text we are going to test for detaching categories and returning an empty array. So test method will be called detaches, Now let's just scroll up a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Detaches categories and returns empty array. Okay, so here categories, and I'm just going to copy what we have here. Categories, and we create 7 of them as well. Let's attach these two same checks as we had before. And the same call, except this time what we are going to do is change this needs categories to 0. And this time we also expect to have HTTP OK, which is status 200. And now response, we expect exact JSON to return just an empty array, because there should be no records returned once we de-associated all the categories with the product. And then what we're going to have is product, this product, and we're going to use fresh with categories, because we want to eager load the categories straight away while we actually fetching the product. So we have the categories available as property, the collection, straight away. And we're going to go for this. Assert count is going to be 0. Product categories. We shouldn't have any categories associated with the product after this call. And then this assert false, we're going to go for product has categories. Because it shouldn't, this particular property now, because it's an accessor, should return false rather than true. So if we run this test, and there we go, it passes. Obviously I'm running this in the ID, but if we run it in a terminal, you can see we now have 2 tests, 11 assertions, all of which are passing, because this second test obviously is corresponding to the work we've already done. Okay, so the next test will toggle the category. And this is going to be the last test during this screencast. So TST, and we have toggles, category association, let's call it. And again, we're going to do something actually. We're going to create, let's create just 3 categories. We don't need so many this time. Excuse me. And we're going to go for this assert count, and we are asserting that our product has 0 categories. So this product categories, it shouldn't have any categories because we didn't associate them like we did before. And then we're gonna go for the call. I'm just going to copy all this. We're gonna modify this slightly because the endpoint is different. The name of the route will be toggle rather than fetch. We need the product, but here we're going to have rather needs categories. This time we're going to specify which category we actually want to associate with it. So it's going to be category ID, and the category is going to be categories. I'm going to go for the first one, so at index 0 and its ID. And now I'm going to do response assert status, and I'm expecting the status OK as well. Response HTTP OK, which is, once again, it's just status 200, but I like using these constants which are available on Symfony's response. You can see here all the status codes that you can use. And then we're going to go for response assert exact JSON. We should have the is attached response set to true. And after this, we are going to go for this assert count again. This time we should have 1 category associated with the product. So this product, and we are going to again take the fresh instance of it. So it's going to make a call to the database, and we want to eager load categories with it as well at the same time. So categories, fresh categories, and then we're gonna actually use this property categories to get the collection of the associated ones. And then we're gonna make another call, and I'm going to copy this entire thing This time we are going to associate, we're going to use actually the same category, because this time we're going to de-associate it. So the status should be okay as well, but is attached should return false. And we should go back to having 0 categories associated with the product. This way we know that you can toggle them. First time you make a call with the same with the category ID, it's going to associate it with the product. Next time it's with the same ID, it's going to detach it from the product. So let's run this test. Obviously that's going to fail. Unit. And we obviously don't have this root. That's the first thing. So if we go to web here and let's just duplicate this one, it's going to be toggle. And we also using a post request type, and it's going to be method called toggle as well, and the name of the root toggle. And we can now close this particular file because we're done with it. So going back to our controller, product category controller, we're going to create this method toggle, so public function toggle, and we're going to return a new JSON response. For now, I'm just going to use this is attached, and I'm going to just specify it as true for the time being. And we are returning JSON response. Again, doc blocks are toggle category association. And okay, so obviously if we run the test, and we're gonna get another error because obviously nothing changes. So the actual size is 0, and we're expecting that that it's going to have 1, but it doesn't, because obviously it doesn't do anything at the moment. It just statically returns this is attached true. So what I'm going to do is create another request, which I'm going to inject to this toggle action, PHP artisan make request, and it's going to be add the category as well, directory, and it's going to be called toggle request. Let's now, as you can see, that's been added. Let's just inject it here. So toggle request, and it's a request. Let's update the doc blocks. Let's go there. Again, authorize. We're not playing with the authorization. Obviously, within your system, you may have some sort of authorization there. For the rules, it's going to return array. We're going to have category ID, which is required. And we are expecting this category to exist in the table categories represented by ID. So this category ID parameter that we're sending through needs to exist within the categories table, matching one of the IDs. Okay, so that's our rules for this request. So the validation, if we don't pass the category ID, then the validation is going to fail and it's not going to return anything anyway. And if it does provide the valid category ID, then we want to toggle this category. So we're going to create a new method, public function toggle. And here we're going to return Boolean. Let's say attach, detach category. And we're going to go for return, and we will type hint it as Boolean. This root, again, we are fetching product instance via this parameter product ID. And then categories on this product model, and we say toggle, and we want to use this category ID. And now we're going to get the attached index from what this toggle method will return. I'm going to show you in a moment where we're getting this attached index. But again, as you can see, my ID is highlighting this. Let's just add doc blocks to this request. And let's just say that we have a property, which is going to be of the integer type called category ID. Now going back, let's just click on this toggle method. Actually, categories. Let's just go product. Excuse me. Toggle. Is this somewhere here? No, belongs to many. Toggle. There we go. So this is the method that we are actually calling on this categories relationship, we just go back to our request. So this toggle method is here. I'm just going to split screen so we can actually see what's happening. So this toggle method, you can see at the beginning, it declares the array with attached and detached. So when you're toggling, if you attach some records, then they will be returned within the attached array as the attached index. Otherwise, if we detached any records, then they will be added to this detached array, and then you will be able to get those records by that index. That's why I'm using attached here to give us Boolean. Excuse me. Because through this operation, I'm only toggling one category, so there should be only one item in the attached. If we detach, then obviously attached is going to be empty, and because we are forcing Boolean on it, that's going to be either true if there is an item in the attached, or false if this attached array is going to be empty. Okay, so now let's go back to our product category controller. And obviously all we need to do now is, rather than just returning true, we can just go for request and call this toggle method, and that will return true or false based on whether we attached this category to the product or detached it from the product. So if we go back and let's run our test, and at the moment we have 3 tests, 18 assertions, all of which are passing. So all our back end, as far as I'm concerned, is done. Let me just quickly double check if we have anything else here that I need to do with it. But I don't think so. I think we are good. Other than if we now go open our product controller, what we want to do is return the instance of the product to the view, so we have it available within our view. So with, and I'm going to go product, this will give us a product variable available within this product index, and we're going to go for product model, and I want to find record 1. At the moment we don't have any records because we didn't even migrate the tables, which we'll do in just a second. So let me just check. So that's all good. We can now close this. Categories, that's all done as well. That's done. And if we open our index, so if I go back to our product index here, so product name now, because we're going to have this product available within our view, we can replace it to curly brackets in our blade template, and we use product name. But if we load it right now, you'll see what's going to happen. Refresh the page, and there we go. Base table view not found because we don't have any table products. Now, if we open our env, we need to specify our connection to the database. Obviously, that database name, it's not going to be Laravel. I'm going to call it, what's this project called? It's Vue Laravel Conditional Association. So vue-cond soc. Let's just call this database like this. I'm using a valid, so I only need a username for the database, which is by default root. Let's just create new table, so new database. I'm going to use UFT8 MB4 for the encoding and collation. There we go. So that's the empty database. The next thing I need to do is run the migration. So PHP artisan migrate. There we go. So that should generate all the tables for us. And it did. Obviously, we don't have product with the ID 1 in that table yet. So perhaps what we should do next is create some seeder. And we're going to create the product seeder, and then we're going to create some seeder for the categories as well. So we connected to the database. That's all good. If we refresh the page, you'll see that this error, the previous error is gone, but obviously we can't find the record, and obviously then we cannot obtain the name on that on the instance of that given object. So if we go back, what we're going to do next, I'm going to go to the terminal and let's create this seeder. So PHP artisan make seed, and we are going to call it product table seeder. And then I'm going to create one for categories as well. So product category table seeder. So these are now done. Let's go back to our editor, and if we open seeds directory, you'll see we have both of these. So under the products, returns void, I'm going to create my product. So product create, and we need to provide the name and name of the product that I want to create, which is going to be track remedy 9.9 27.5, and let's import this model. There we go. So that's our first seeder. Let's add it to our main database seeder, which is run when we calling db seed. It's just uncommented, and let's add it. So product table seeder, that's the first one we want to run, and then we're gonna run as well category table seeder. So category table seeder. So both of these we want to run when we are running the seed command. Okay, for the categories, we are going to create 4 categories when we are running this seed. So for this, we're going to use a factory because we have factory for the category. So category class, and let's import this class as well, and let's create name. We're gonna say mountain bikes. Let's create another one. Next one is going to be road bikes. Let's create another one. This time we are going to have hybrid bikes, and the last one is going to be electric bikes. Okay, so that should create 4 categories for us, so we have something to play with. So what we want to do now is run php artisan db seed, so we can seed the database, and there we go, this executed. So if we now check our tables, excuse me, if I refresh the products table, you can see we have the first product and we have our 4 categories available. So now if I go back to the browser, refresh the page, and there we go, we have the name of the product now dynamically displayed based on what record we have in the database. So the next thing we're going to do is obviously start working with our components, our vue.js components. So let me just quickly have a look at what I've got prepared here. So the first thing, if I just go back, we are going to start with the wrapper for our group selection. Is that the one? No, our form wrapper. Okay, so let's close all these because our backend is now done. Let's go to the resources, JS, and the first component we are going to create is going to be called form wrapper. And here, what have we got here? We are going to start, we're going to just provide the form wrapper, and then we're going to use the slot, and we're going to pass fields to that slot, which will come from the property fields, and that's going to be it. So basically, whatever we are going to put in between the opening and closing form wrapper component tag within the view is going to be passed through to the slot, and we're going to have fields property available for us within the body of this component. So first of all, let's give it some name. Name, it's going to be just form wrapper. For the properties, we're going to pass a record, and it's going to be of the type object, and the default value needs to be a function returning an empty object. Then for the data, we're going to have fields which will represent this record. We don't need any methods, so we can remove this. So now these fields, which by default will come through the property because we are associating this record with the fields, then will be passed through to this slot. And it all will make a little bit more sense in just a moment. Okay, so let's register this component. We're going to import, and it's going to be form wrapper from form wrapper. Let's make sure that we have it available. Form wrapper, which we now register on this instance of Vue. Okay, so now what we can do, we can wrap this entire section within the with this form wrapper. So what I'm going to do is use this form that we have here in this template, and I turn it into this component. So form wrapper, and it will have this class because we want to attach this class, which will then be automatically attached to this form within this component, within this template. And it's close this form wrapper as well. Make sure that obviously if your IDE doesn't do it automatically, that you change the first opening and closing form tag to this form wrapper. And before this, we're gonna go for record, which will equal, and we're gonna pass the object because it needs to be an object, as you may remember. Needs categories, which is basically one field that we're going to be later on dispatching with our request. And we need this as integer, either 1 or 0. So I'm going to use two curly brackets because we're in a blade template. We are going to use integer, type hinting, typecasting, and we use product. And from our product, as you may remember, you have this accessor called has categories, which will return either Boolean true or false. Obviously, typecasting it to integer, it will convert true into 1 and false to 0. And then slot, we need to fetch this slot, so v slot, and we're going to use just fields. And if we go back, obviously, well, where's this component? It's here. We are passing this field, so now we have this field variable available for whatever we want to do inside of this slot. Okay, so if we go back to our, obviously I need to now recompile the files because I've added this to our app.js, but it's not available yet. If I just open console here, you'll see that we're going to have some errors. Obviously, unknown element form wrapper, and this is because we didn't recompile the assets. Excuse me. So let's now run npm run watch. So they recompile as we save the changes. We need to wait a little while, but while we wait for the assets to recompile, let's just go back. Now, what do we want to do next? Now, this select here, we have yes and no, 1 and 0, stays the way it is. The only thing that we are going to change here is we are going to attach the vModel directive to it. So vModel, and we associate this fields needs categories with it. What this will do is every time we change the value with this select, this needs categories on this form wrapper will change as well automatically, reactively, in other words. So that's all fine. Let's just, I think this is recompiled. So if we refresh the page, now we can see it. And if we go and preview it in a Vue console, if you haven't got it installed, you can install the Vue DevTools through the extensions in Chrome. So you can see at the moment needs categories 0. If I change it to 1, it's automatically updating to 1 and so on. So whatever we do, if I was to now show this particular div based on whether this needs categories is set to 1 or 0, we can do something like this. If fields needs categories equals 1. If it's 1, then display this block, otherwise don't. So if we refresh this, as you can see now it's hidden. If I change it to yes, it displays it back and so on. So that's exactly what we want to happen. Now, but how do we make this call to the server to actually fetch these categories and find out which ones are associated or not? And then obviously detach them if we select no from this select. Now, what we're going to use for this particular purpose, we can now close this form wrapper, is the constructor and destructor of the Vue component. So when we construct it, because it will be revealed, because we're using vif directive, when it's going to be constructed, shown in other words, then it's going to call one method, And when we're going to hide it, because it's going to be destructed, it's going to call another. So that's how we're going to do it. So the next component is going to be the main component for this whole screencast. And it's going to be called, let's just create new Vue.js. It's going to be called group selection. And what we are going to do now is, before we do anything else, let's just go to our app and let's import it, group selection, and let's register it with the Vue, with our Vue instance. So group selection. What we can also do now is remove this checkbox one, because that's no longer going to be needed outside of this component, because this will only be available, needed within this group selection. Obviously, if you are using this anywhere else within your application, this checkbox, keep it there, but for this particular course, we don't need it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually import it to this component. So import, and we're going to go for checkbox. From checkbox, I don't like this indentation here. We're going to give it a name first. Group selection. Oh, it's messing with me here. Okay. And then we're going to have components, which will be this checkbox. This is the component we're going to make use of. Now, for the properties, we're going to have fetch action, where we can fetch all of the records, and it's going to be of the type string, and it is required. So required, set to true. And then we're going to have save action when we actually click on the checkbox to make sure that we're making a call for this toggling endpoint. So we're going to call it, we could call it toggle, but I'm going to call it, maybe toggle is a good one, actually, toggle action. Yeah, let's call it a toggle action. Fetch and toggle, which are reflecting what we have in our controller. Type again string, and it also is required. So required, set to true. So shall we start with the template? Let's start with the template. I'm going to split the screen here. And we've registered all of that. That's good. So what I'm going to do is cut what we have here, except for this label, because I want this, excuse me, label. If you want to change it in any way, I don't want this to be part of this component. We're only going to have this list of records. So I'm going to cut all this and leave this label inside of this div for now, because it is still a div at the moment. But actually we can change it now to our group selection. But now we're going to obviously need those endpoints as well, pass through those properties, which we'll do in just a moment. Okay, we're going to start with a div inside of this template, and we're going to check v if we're only going to display whatever's inside of this div, if categories, which we don't have, the property we don't have yet, length is going to evaluate to true. So if there's more than one category, obviously one or more than one, then that's going to be true. Otherwise, if there won't be any categories, nothing that's inside of it is going to be returned. Okay, I'm just going to go back a little bit. Now, because we are inside of this component and we're going to be recompiling this using the Babel and so on and Webpack, we can just use the self-closing tag for the checkbox. If you are doing this within the browser, not all browsers support self-closing tags. So it's probably better than if you're using the closing tag with it. Excuse me, I need some water. Okay, so as I said, we're gonna have some slot. So whatever we put inside of it is also displayed, and I want the slots to be within this before those checkboxes. So just a default slot, we don't need to pass anything to it. It will only contain what we put in between the opening and closing group selection tag. Our class is all fine. So now, before we go any further, what I'm going to do is actually provide some methods that are going to fetch those records. So let's start with the data. Data will have categories, which by default will return an empty array. And then we're going to have processing set to false by default. This will represent whether we are currently executing the Ajax call or not. When we're gonna start the execution, when we're gonna start making a call, this processing will turn to true. Otherwise, it's going to false. So then we can use it if we want to provide some sort of visual feedback. Perhaps disable checkboxes or something like this when we are processing the call. Okay, so as I said earlier, we are going to use constructor and destructor. So the constructor will refer to the created method. So when this particular component is being created, then we're going to call method fetch, and the payload we're going to send will be needs categories set to 1. And I copy all this because then we're going to have a destructor, which is going to be destroyed. And here what we're going to do is exactly the same, but this time we are going to call this method with the property, with the value, with this parameter. This indentation drives me mad. Oh, come on. Okay, let's just indent it the same way at least. Set to 0. As you may remember, when we are fetching these records, if I just go back to product category controller and to toggle request, let's open this in here. This can be closed. Based on whether it's, sorry, that's not the one, of course, is it? It's a different one. For the fetching, we have needs categories, which we are passing. When we're starting, we want to fetch all the categories. We're only going to have this component called is created when if we just go back here, when our has category is going to be set to 1, because this is the only time that this is going to be revealed. So this is when this created will be called. Otherwise, when we're going to hide it, when this needs category is going to be set to no, destroyed is going to be called, and with 0 as a parameter, obviously we're going to detach all of the categories. Okay, so now let's create this method, fetch method. So fetch method, which will take some payload, and we're going to start with this processing set to true, meaning that we're starting our Ajax call, and then we're going to use Axios post type of the request. And now Axios, if you go to Bootstrap, you can see it's one of the dependencies from a package, from our npm dependencies, and I've got it registered globally under the window. I've already attached CSRF token, which you can find under the main app file, blade template, obviously for our application here. So that's been fetched and appended to the headers. So all is prepared. We just have to use it globally like this, Axios, and then whichever method on it we want to call. And in this particular case, we are going for post. Then we're going to go for this fetch action, which is the endpoint we want to call, and then what data we want to send with it, which is going to represent this payload. In our case, if it's on created, it's going to be needs categories with 1. Otherwise, it's going to be needs categories with 0. And then what we're going to do is then when the request comes back and is successful, then we're going to delegate it to the fetch success method. Otherwise, we're going to catch the error and we're going to delegate it to the this failure. Let's add this fetch success and failure method as well. So fetch success response that we're going to receive. We're going to go for this categories response data, which is going to return whatever our controller is going to return back, which should contain the list of categories or the empty array. And then we need to stop this processing. So processing we set back to false. And then the failure. So failure will take an error. First of all, what we're going to do is set this processing to false as well. And then we're just going to console log it. So error. If there was any error, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so that's for fetching data. Now, let's have a look at, actually, we should presumably see something already. If we just attach the v-if statement, v4, let's just loop through those. So v4 category in categories. We should now have key category value. And then we do on this span. Excuse me. We're going to have class pointer inline block, and also what we're going to have is dynamic class based on whether we are currently processing the AJAX request. We're going to set opacity to 50 when processing. So if this processing property is set to true, make sure the opacity of this checkbox and the label for the given category is only at 50%. And again, as I said earlier, we are using Tailwind CSS for all these classes. If you obviously want to find the reference for what's happening, just go to Tailwind CSS I can't remember, .io, I think, or com. Anyway, so text small, and obviously now we can display the label for the given category. So 2 curly brackets and category name. Now checkbox, as you may remember, if we go back to checkbox, takes this checked parameter. Depending on whether it's checked or not, it displays the icon for checked or unchecked. So we're going to use checked, and because we have this is attached attribute available with each of the categories, as you may remember, we were mapping. If I just open back, if we go back to our requests, fetch, there we go, we have this attached. Depending on whether the given category is associated with the product, will return true or false, so we can obviously pass it now to this checkbox. So category is attached. Okay, and with any luck, we should see something working already. So at the moment, we don't have any categories associated. We click yes, and it doesn't work. Okay, something's wrong. Let's quickly have a look. Cannot use import statement. Okay, because that's what my IDE does, doesn't it? It just imports those components directly into the Blade templates. Refresh the page. Let's try again. Yes, and we have fetch action missing, of course, because we didn't specify the action. So let's go back to our index blade. So what we need to do here, we have this component. We only displaying this when the needs category is set to 1. So fetch action, which will correspond to our fetch action property here, will be, and we use the root product category. Come on, category fetch, which is the named root. Obviously, we've set up earlier product ID as the parameter, which will, if I just go back to our roots web, there we go, bypassing this product ID as a second argument to this root, that will replace this argument here. And this particular one is going to go to this named fetch root. Okay, so that's the fetch one, and then we have the toggle one as well. Toggle action, which will be product category toggle. So these two are now set. Was there anything else here? No, I think that's this. Let's refresh this page and let's see what's going to happen now. Yes, and there we go. All our categories, as you can see, the fetch call has been made to the server with the needs categories set to 1, and what it returned was this collection of photo categories that we have. Obviously, saving doesn't work yet, but it does fetch the category. If I go to no, you'll see that we have an empty array returned. If we go back to yes, again, all of the records are being returned. So we are getting somewhere. Okay, now let's have a look at this toggle action. So we can actually save it. Let's just have a look at the group again. So what we want to do is when we click on this label here, which includes the checkbox, we would like to call this toggle method. So on click, call toggle method, and we want to pass the payload to it. It's going to be category ID, will be category value. So currently loop iterated category value we're passing as the category ID to this toggle method. Okay, so the toggle method, which takes payload. And again, we're going to do something very similar to what we did here. So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to copy all this. We start processing. Rather than fetch action, we're going to use toggle action. And we pass in the payload. It's also post type of the request. Then on success, what I'm going to do is use the response. Actually, I'm going to tackle this slightly different. I'm going to use the function here. So response. And we are going to call this fetch success, passing the data category ID as well as the response to it. And then for failure, it's the same approach. We just stop processing and then console log it. So fetch success, sorry, it's not fetch success, it's going to be toggle success here. Toggle success. And there's a particular reason why I want to do it this way rather than just delegating this as we did here. So I want to have category ID. ID is the first, come on. ID is the first one, and then we're gonna have response as the second one. So the first thing I'm going to do is this categories equals this categories, and then map, and each of the categories, so category, and we're using the curly function here, the arrow function rather than the curly. Okay, if category value does not equal the currently iterated category value, does not equal category ID, the parameter that we pass through as an argument, for which this given call has been made, then we just return it. So category, the whole object gets returned. Otherwise, what we're going to do is set this category is attached property to whatever has been returned with the response. So we're going to go for the response, data, and then we have is attached. Because with this call, if I just go back one, toggle, as you may remember, we are returning whether the controller, the given category has been attached or detached from the given product. So that's going to be updated on this collection, and then we return this category as well. Okay, and lastly, this processing was set to false. We've finished processing the request. And I think that's everything. We should just double check. I don't see any other differences here. I think that's that. So if you go back, refresh the page, again, fetching with yes, returns all the records. I select mountain bikes. Oops, something's not working. Attach true. If I refresh, it displays it, but when I click it, it doesn't. There's something wrong with it. Okay. Let me just double check. Reference data is not defined. Group selection. Okay, let's have a look at that. Category. Data. It's not data, it's payloads. Category ID. Okay, let's try again. Same thing. Detaching seems to be working. Still refreshing the page. If I deselect the last one, refresh the page, that should remove all the associations. So if I go to category labels, you can see the table is empty now. If I refresh, that's going to go to no because you didn't have any categories associated. If I go back to yes and refresh, that will do nothing as well because obviously we didn't check any checkbox. But if I go back to yes and select one of the categories, you'll see this is automatically selecting it and associating the category with the product. So if we attach another one, another couple, you can see that's working fine. If I now hit on no with this request, that should clear this association because we don't want any categories to be associated with it. So I think that's everything. That covers everything here. Let me just double check. Oh, hi guys. Sorry, I didn't see your comments just now. Yeah, hi everyone. Yes, that's it. That's it. So we're pretty much done. So if I just scroll down, yeah, no, that's all good. So that's it in this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Some feedback, welcome, obviously. Use the comment section if you have any suggestions, any questions. And yeah, hope to see you in the future live screencasts. All right. Cheers and all the best.